Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into the smoke, sweat, and symphony of clanging metal that was the Industrial Revolution. The time when humanity collectively decided that peace and quiet were overrated. This was the age when fire powered dreams, when progress had a heartbeat made of pistons and coal, and when people worked so hard they accidentally invented overtime. If you've ever complained about your 9 to 5, just wait until you meet the 12-year-olds running spinning machines in a windowless mill for 16 hours a day. Before we go any further, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy this kind of darkly cozy time travel. Drop a comment to tell me where you're listening from and what invention you think changed the world the most. The steam engine, electricity, or maybe coffee. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's drift back to the moment when the world caught fire, not metaphorically but literally. Before the hum of machinery and the glow of gas lamps, the world moved at the speed of a horse. The rhythm of life was simple. Sunrise meant work, sunset meant rest, and progress was measured in harvests, not horsepower. Villages were quiet, slow, and alive with the kind of boredom that forces people to invent poetry. But under those peaceful green hills of England and Scotland, under the farms and cobblestone lanes, lay something dark. Ancient forests crushed by time into glittering black veins of coal. It waited patiently, humming quietly beneath the earth, until humanity was desperate enough to dig it out. It didn't start with grandeur or glory. It began in damp workshops and smoky taverns where men with wild hair and ink-stained hands obsessed over how to make water boil better. They weren't building empires, just trying to keep their minds from flooding. The first steam engines were clumsy beasts, all hissing valves and rattling pipes, barely controlled explosions that turned water into motion. But they worked, and once they worked, they couldn't be stopped. The 1700s were about to become the world's first all-nighter. Imagine a town where the air tastes like soot and metal, where the horizon glows orange, not from sunsets, but from furnaces. The gentle rhythm of village life is replaced by a constant mechanical pulse. Wheels spin, gears grind, hammers fall. The Industrial Revolution wasn't a single event. It was a fever that spread, a wildfire of invention that turned fields into factories and farmers into factory hands. People moved in waves, away from the land that had fed them for generations, towards cities that promised wages but rarely delivered comfort. The streets filled with smoke and ambition. Children carried coal instead of flowers. Women ran looms that never slept. Men lost count of the days because the machines didn't care what time it was. And yet, beneath all that noise, something else was stirring. Possibility. The first cotton mills looked almost alive. Great mechanical creatures devouring raw fluff and spitting out endless thread. Each spool meant profit, expansion, domination. Britain became the workshop of the world, its empire built not on gold or conquest, but on spinning wheels and steam. Every invention seemed to lead to another, the spinning jenny to the power loom to the steam engine to the train. It was a cascade of genius and madness. Coal powered everything, homes, locomotives, factories, even dreams. It blackened skies and lungs in equal measure. The world became addicted to speed, and there was no going back. Horses were replaced by engines, lanterns by gaslight, muscles by machines. A farmer from the countryside could step off a train in Manchester and find himself standing inside a city that pulsed like a living organism. Loud, alive, and indifferent. The air shimmered with heat and ambition. Iron bridges arched over rivers thick with soot. Steamships cut across oceans, binding continents with iron will. For the first time, humanity wasn't at the mercy of nature. It was competing with it. But progress, as it turns out, is not a gentle teacher. For every invention that changed the world, there were thousands of hands that paid for it. Children as young as 5 cleaned the insides of chimneys because adults were too big to fit. Women lost hair and fingers to spinning wheels. Men suffocated in mines for pennies a day. Factories were miracles of efficiency, but they had no mercy. There were no breaks, no safety nets, no weekends. Time itself became currency, divided, measured, and sold. And yet people kept showing up because progress has a hypnotic rhythm. Once the wheels start turning, you can't look away. Not everyone hated it. To some, it was intoxicating. The idea that humans could finally build their destiny instead of praying for it. The cities became magnets for dreamers, inventors, and opportunists. Every smoky alley could hold a new idea. Every soot-streaked worker might be the next Watt or Stevenson. Innovation didn't just create machines, it created hope. The Industrial Revolution was a contradiction in motion, filthy and brilliant, cruel and ingenious, suffocating and electrifying. It gave us trains and telegraphs, but also slums and soot. It made the night glow, but the lungs ache. It turned the world into a machine, one that never stopped moving. And somewhere between the grinding of gears and the hiss of steam, something extraordinary happened. Humanity changed its heartbeat. We became creatures of speed, efficiency, and ambition. We learned to measure success not in contentment but in output. The factory bell replaced the church bell. The whistle replaced birdsong. The world no longer woke with the sun, and it woke with the steam whistle. It's easy to think of the Industrial Revolution as a historical chapter, something long finished, tucked neatly behind museum glass. But if you listen closely tonight, to the hum of your fan, the vibration of your phone, the electricity running through your walls, you'll hear it. The same heartbeat, the same rhythm, the same restless need to make more, faster, better. Because the Industrial Revolution never really ended, it just changed clothes. So tonight, as we drift deeper into this story, remember, every invention, every convenience, every glowing screen began with one spark. A puff of steam, a shovelful of coal, and a dreamer who thought, what if we could make the world move? Dim the lights a little lower, the smoke is rising, the gears are turning, and the age of industry is just beginning. Picture it. England, late 1600s. Everything smells faintly of coal dust and damp wool. The streets are muddy, the taverns are loud, and the brightest minds in Europe are stuck on a single, absurd problem: how to get water out of the ground. Mines flood constantly, pumps fail, and deep underground, fortunes in tin and coal are just sitting there, mocking everyone brave enough to dig. So, naturally, a few eccentric geniuses decide to fight back. They roll up their sleeves, stare at some boiling water and think, what if this could move things? It sounds simple now, turning heat into motion. But in those early days, it bordered on witchcraft. The first steam engines weren't sleek locomotives or grand machines. They were monstrous contraptions, all hissing valves, rattling levers, and dripping condensation. They wheezed like asthmatic dragons and groaned like they were in pain. But somehow, miraculously, they worked. The earliest versions were clunky beasts, tethered to mines, their sole purpose to pump out water that threatened to drown entire operations. Thomas Newcomen's engine, built in 1712, was a mechanical prayer answered in iron and steam. It was slow, inefficient, and absolutely revolutionary. For the first time in human history, motion didn't come from muscle, wind, or water. It came from the controlled chaos of boiling water. And with that, the world exhaled a puff of steam and whispered, finally. Word spread fast, not about comfort or beauty. These engines weren't that kind of invention, but about power. Endless, tireless power. Power that didn't rest or eat or ask for wages. Miners and manufacturers saw salvation in every piston stroke, and soon other tinkerers began to smell opportunity. One of them was a quiet Scotsman named James Watt. You've heard the name, but probably never realized that without him, your entire world would still run on windmills and water wheels. Watt didn't invent the steam engine, but he perfected it. He saw the inefficiencies in Newcomen's model, all that wasted heat, all that effort lost in condensation, and thought, we can do better. And he did. By adding a separate condenser, Watt turned steam from a crude force into a disciplined one. His engine was faster, stronger, and efficient enough to run factories. Suddenly, this wasn't just about draining mines, it was about replacing muscle altogether. The idea was intoxicating. For better and for worse, factories began to hum. Mill owners realized that one engine could do the work of hundreds of laborers. What started as a simple fix for flooded mines became the heartbeat of industry. Iron foundries, textile mills, breweries, all fed by the hiss and pulse of steam. Every invention seemed to multiply itself. One new idea sparked 5 more. By the 1780s, Watt's engines were spreading faster than rumours in a pub, and where steam went, money followed. Britain transformed almost overnight from a sleepy agrarian island to the workshop of the world. The landscape changed first. Rivers that once powered water wheels went quiet as factories moved inland, no longer tethered to running water. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Glasgow became industrial hives, loud, dirty, and unstoppable. Chimneys rose like iron trees, blackening the sky. Streets trembled with the rhythm of machinery. The air filled with soot and optimism in equal measure. If you were alive then, it must have felt like magic. Terrifying magic, but magic nonetheless. Imagine watching a hulking, fire-breathing machine come to life for the first time. The ground shakes, the air shimmers with heat, pistons pump like the heartbeat of some mechanical giant. You can feel the power radiating through the floorboards. People stood in awe, half expecting these engines to turn on their creators and start demanding rights, and maybe, in a way, they did. Because with steam came change, and change rarely arrives politely. The new engines didn't just move pistons, they moved people. Rural families, lured by the promise of wages, flooded into cities. Farmers became machinists. Artisans became factory hands. Children traded fields for spinning rooms. The hum of the countryside gave way to the roar of machinery. The world's soundtrack had officially changed from birdsong to boiler hiss. Steam didn't stop at factories either. Someone, perhaps the first true visionary of the industrial age, realized that if steam could lift water, it could lift people too. Enter the age of locomotion. George Stephenson, another unassuming genius, built engines that didn't just stay in place, they moved. His early locomotives were clumsy, spitting cinders and smoke, but they had one irresistible feature: speed. Suddenly, a journey that once took days by horse could be done in hours. The world began to shrink. Railroads spread like veins across the countryside, carrying coal, cotton, and curiosity. Towns that were once isolated found themselves connected to global trade. The horizon itself seemed to move closer. And with that, humanity's relationship to time changed forever. Before steam, people lived by the rhythm of the sun, waking with dawn, resting at dusk. But trains didn't care about sunlight. They cared about timetables. So we invented time zones. Imagine that. An invention so powerful, it literally bent time to its will. Every whistle, every puff of smoke, every turning wheel was a declaration that nature no longer set the pace. We did. Of course, progress comes with a price tag. And for all its brilliance, the steam age was filthy. The air in industrial cities grew thick enough to chew. Rivers turned black. Buildings were coated in soot. People coughed coal dust instead of air. The first modern cities were miracles of engineering and environmental disasters waiting to happen. But nobody stopped to think about that. Not yet. They were too busy chasing what steam promised: control. Control over distance, over nature, over time itself. And that's the paradox of the Industrial Revolution. Every leap forward came with a shadow. Every invention made life easier for some and harder for others. The same steam that powered progress also powered greed. The same engines that lifted economies also crushed workers beneath schedules and smoke. But in that moment, that electric, chaotic dawn of steam, the world didn't see the smoke. It only saw the light. People dreamed bigger. Inventors became celebrities. Engineers became artists. Factories became temples to progress. The sound of hissing steam wasn't just noise. It was a hymn to the future. Because for the first time in history, humanity realized it could build its own destiny out of metal and fire. So, as the smoke rises and the pistons slow, remember this. Every hum of your phone, every buzz of your car engine, every whir of electricity around you tonight began here. In a damp English workshop, with a few curious minds staring into a boiling pot, wondering if they could make it move. And they did. They changed everything. There's a sound that defines the Industrial Revolution, and it isn't the whistle of a steam train or the hammer of a blacksmith. It's the rhythmic, endless clatter of looms. Picture it, a massive brick mill by a river, windows fogged with condensation, the air thick with lint that drifts like snow but never melts. Inside, rows of machines pulse and whir, their metal teeth biting at threads of cotton pulled from faraway fields. The noise is so constant that silence begins to feel unnatural. People learn to shout over it, to time their conversations between mechanical breaths. This is the age of cotton, the heartbeat of the new world. It all begins with a deceptively simple goal: make more fabric, faster. For centuries, cloth was the work of patient hands. Women at spinning wheels, men at looms, families who turned flax or wool into something wearable over long winter nights. But demand exploded. The empire was growing, cities were swelling, and suddenly everyone wanted clothes that didn't cost half a year's wages. So inventors got busy. First came John Kay's flying shuttle in 1733, a device that let a single weaver do the work of two. Then came James Hargreaves with his spinning jenny, Richard Arkwright with the water frame, and Samuel Crompton with the spinning mule. Each invention layered on the last, and before long, the humble spinning wheel had evolved into a roaring mechanical beast. What once took hours could now be done in minutes. Threads spun faster, fabric grew cheaper, and profit margins widened. Cotton, soft, white, and seemingly innocent, became the fuel of empire. But cotton doesn't grow in Manchester. To feed Britain's new machines, the fibers had to come from somewhere warm and willing. That somewhere was India, Egypt, and the American South, lands where labor was cheap and, in some cases, enslaved. The soft thread that touched every British home was steeped in sweat and blood before it ever reached the loom. Ships crossed the Atlantic heavy with bales of raw cotton, unloaded at Liverpool, and sent inland by canal or horse cart to the mills of Lancashire. By the early 1800s, those mills were running day and night, their chimneys pouring black smoke into skies that once reflected only rain and cloud. Inside, the workers were mostly women and children. Children were perfect for the job, or at least that's what the factory owners thought. Small hands could dart between spinning bobbins and moving gears. Tiny bodies could crawl under machines to fix threads or clear clogs. Many began working at 8 or 9, their wages a fraction of an adult's, their lives a blur of motion and noise. 12-hour shifts were common. 14 wasn't unusual, food was meagre, sleep was brief, and the dust from the cotton-clogged lungs turning coughs into companions. But to the owners, and to some degree the government, this was progress. The mills brought jobs, the machines brought wealth, the empire brought cotton. Everyone, in theory, benefited, except the ones who didn't. And yet, in the strangest way, the Industrial Revolution did change everything, even for those inside the mills. Because for the first time in history, the idea of work shifted. Before, work followed the seasons. Farmers sowed and harvested with the sun. Craftsmen set their own pace. Now time belonged to the clock. Bells rang workers in and out. The rhythm of life no longer matched nature's, it matched the machines. The factory became a new kind of ecosystem, one built not on soil or wind, but on power, precision, and profit. Men became overseers, women became laborers, children became part of the machinery. The human body was measured not by strength or skill, but by output. And slowly the world began to see people as another kind of resource. Still, amid the grind and grit, something remarkable stirred. The textile towns grew into engines of innovation. Manchester became known as Cottonopolis, the city of cotton. Streets lit up with gas lamps, newspapers chronicled industrial triumphs, and wealth, however unevenly, began to multiply. Textiles didn't just clothe people, they connected them. The demand for raw materials pushed global trade to new extremes. Canals were dug, railways were planned, banks and stock markets swelled with investments tied to the thread. Entire fortunes were spun from the hum of machinery and the flutter of cloth drying in mill windows. The world began to shrink, and all because of fabric. But there's another layer to this story, one that clings to every fiber. Cotton wasn't just about industry, it was about identity. Wearing cotton became a quiet revolution of its own. Before the industrial age, only the wealthy could afford soft, white linens or fine muslins from India. Now the middle class dressed in cotton shirts and dresses. The working class, too, could buy ready-made garments. For the first time, fashion trickled downward. Appearance became democratic. The lines between rich and poor blurred, not entirely, but enough to spark anxiety among the upper crust. Cotton changed how people saw themselves. It made the world faster, cleaner, and somehow more modern. Of course, the transformation came at a cost, one that no one wanted to tally at the time. The air turned dark with soot. Rivers ran white with bleach. Entire landscapes disappeared under mills, warehouses, and the skeletal rise of new cities. The working poor moved into cramped rows of brick houses where the same damp air from the factory followed them home. Disease flourished. Accidents happened daily. And through it all, the machines never stopped. Progress was intoxicating and relentless. Still, if you stood outside one of those mills at dawn with the whistle cutting through the fog, you might have felt it. That strange, humming energy that meant something new had begun. A world powered not by muscle or wind, but by human ambition, the stubborn, noisy kind that refused to rest. The age of cotton wasn't glamorous, it wasn't kind, but it was unstoppable. It spun together wealth and misery, invention and exploitation, and somehow wove it all into the fabric of the modern world. And as the looms clattered on, the empire's appetite only grew. More machines, more steam, more power. The age of cotton would soon give way to the age of iron, where rails would bind continents and steamships would conquer oceans. The city wakes before the sun. Not gently, not like the slow stretch of morning light through curtains, but suddenly, with a shriek. A factory whistle tears through the fog, echoing down rows of narrow brick houses. Windows glow, doors slam, boots scrape against cobblestones, slick with soot. The air already smells of coal, metal, and urgency. This is not the pastoral England of poets and painters. This is the England of smoke. And in this new, restless world, sleep is a luxury few can afford. The Industrial Revolution has fully arrived, and it does not knock politely. It bursts through the front door with machines, money, and misery all tangled together. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds swell like overfilled lungs, straining under the weight of workers who have traded fields for factories. Red brick walls rise where meadows once were, their chimneys pumping black clouds into skies that haven't seen blue in weeks. Everything hums, everything moves. Inside the mills, rows upon rows of machines click and spin, powered by steam, sweat, and something even stronger: desperation. Each piston's rhythm is the heartbeat of a new world that cannot stop beating, even when the people within it falter. There's no pause, no silence, only the whistle that signals the next shift. The factory floor is a kingdom of motion. Belts whip through the air, wheels grind, threads snap and hiss. And among it all, people, hundreds, sometimes thousands, move like cogs in a living engine. Children dart between machines taller than themselves, their faces pale beneath the soot. Women feed cotton into spindles, their hair tied back tightly so it doesn't catch in the gears. Men haul coal, fix pipes or oil, the monstrous contraptions that never seem to rest. 12-hour days? Normal. 14? Expected. Sundays? Optional, depending on how much you owed the landlord. Meals are eaten standing up, often beside the same machines that threaten to crush, slice, or burn. Accidents happen daily. A mangled hand here, a broken limb there, and yet the machines keep going, because the machine doesn't care. And neither really does the clock. That's the real invention of this age, not the steam engine, not the spinning mule, not even the power loom. The true revolution is time itself. For the first time in history, a worker's value can be measured not by what they make, but by how long it takes to make it. Hours become currency, minutes become worth something. Every second spent resting is a second not producing, not earning. Time is money, says the new gospel of industry, and soon everyone believes it. The rhythm of life, once guided by the sun, now ticks to the metronome of profit. Wake up at the whistle, work by the clock, sleep when you can, repeat. And so the factory becomes a machine that runs on people. Outside, the cities swell and sprawl. Tenements rise hastily, packed tight as matchboxes. Whole families, sometimes 6 or 8, share a single damp room. Walls drip with condensation. Rats scurry across floorboards. The smell of smoke, sweat, and sewage seeps into everything. Children are born, grow up, and go to work without ever seeing a real field. The sky above their world is a permanent twilight of ash and fog. And yet, despite it all, people keep coming. From the countryside, from Ireland, from across the sea, drawn by rumour, by hunger, by the fragile promise of work. The factory is cruel, but it pays. The city is choking, but alive. If you walked the streets then, you might have thought the world had gone mad. And in a way, it had. Progress became feverish. Every invention led to another. Every breakthrough demanded 10 more. Textiles, iron, coal, transport, all feeding each other in a dizzying, unstoppable cycle. Capitalists grew rich enough to build mansions on the edge of the same soot-stained towns that made their fortunes. Politicians debated reform, philosophers debated morality. But down on the factory floor there was no time for debate. There was only the sound, that unending mechanical pulse that drowned out everything else, even thought. And yet, amid the chaos, something human refused to die. Workers began whispering, quietly at first, about fairness, about safety, about the idea that maybe 12-year-olds shouldn't be working beside spinning blades. Churches opened soup kitchens, writers and reformers exposed the horrors of child labor in pamphlets that made even the wealthy squirm. The idea of the working class took shape, not as a statistic, but as an identity, because when people live, suffer, and strive together long enough, something unbreakable begins to form between them, a sense of we. The fever spread, yes, but so did awareness, and soon reform would follow. Not fast enough, but enough to keep the dream of progress from collapsing under its own smoke. It's strange to think about now, how the same age that gave us child labor also gave us the foundations of modern democracy. How the same mills that broke bodies also forged social change. The Industrial Revolution was never one story. It was 1,000, all grinding against each other like gears, greed and genius, exploitation and innovation, hope and despair, packed tight beneath factory roofs. And beneath it all, that relentless hum, the sound of ambition made mechanical. By night, when the last shift finally stumbled home, the city didn't sleep so much as pause. The factories went quiet, but their smoke still hung heavy in the air. Street lamps flickered against brick walls, casting long shadows of chimneys that looked almost like monuments. Inside cramped rooms, workers dreamed of open fields, of rest, of silence, luxuries their grandparents once took for granted. Outside, the gears of industry cooled, waiting for dawn to start again. Progress, it seemed, had no off switch. This was factory fever, a sickness and a triumph burning through the heart of the 19th century. It built empires and crushed innocence, raised skylines and lowered lifespans. It made humanity both more powerful and more fragile than ever before. And though the smoke would one day clear, the rhythm it created, the clockwork tempo of modern life, never really went away. We still live by it, still wake to alarms, still trade time for money, still chase minutes as if they were gold dust. The factories changed shape, but the fever remains. If steam was the breath of the Industrial Revolution, then iron was its bones. It began humbly enough in the forges of blacksmiths, where men with soot-blackened faces hammered glowing metal into horseshoes, nails, and plows. But somewhere in those roaring furnaces, the world found its next obsession. Iron, that dull, stubborn ore, would become the skeleton of a new age, the framework upon which progress would hang its ambitions. And before long, everything, from the rails beneath your feet to the engines that roared above them, would shimmer with that same metallic promise. Imagine the early 1800s fields rolling under grey skies, villages still clinging to old rhythms. Then suddenly the ground trembled. A distant chug, a hiss, a metallic growl that grows louder, closer, until it bursts into view. A steam locomotive, black as night and twice as loud, screaming across the countryside like a living dragon. Sparks fly, wheels thunder, people scatter in awe and fear. Horses rear up in terror, farmers pause mid-plough just to stare at this mechanical miracle tearing through their quiet world. For the first time in human history, speed had a sound. Iron was not new. Humans had shaped it for centuries. But this was different. This was iron at scale. Iron as destiny. Foundries roared day and night, melting mountains into molten rivers. Workers poured the glowing metal into molds, birthing beams, plates and rails. The air shimmered with heat, and sparks leapt like fireflies. What once took days of handwork could now be produced by machines in endless quantities. Bridges spanned rivers that had once marked the edge of known travel. Viaducts leapt across valleys, daring gravity to argue. Massive iron skeletons began to rise in cities, early prototypes of skyscrapers, monuments to man's growing appetite for height. But the true revolution was on the rails. The railway became the great unifier. Before trains, distance was tyranny. Journeys were long, slow, and uncertain, dependent on horses, weather, and luck. But now, a machine could drag hundreds of tons of cargo or hundreds of people across miles in hours. The world suddenly felt smaller and faster. Coal fed the engines, steam drove the pistons, and the countryside blurred into motion. Farmers could send milk to cities before it spoiled. Factories could move goods across nations. People could travel just to see, not to survive, not to trade, but to explore. Travel itself became a spectacle, a symbol of progress, a hint of something new, leisure. But it wasn't just the rails that iron transformed. Cities began to gleam with its presence. Iron bridges arched elegantly across rivers. Iron cranes lifted ships in docks. Iron beams supported entire factories, allowing walls to soar higher and windows to stretch wider. Even art caught the fever, intricate ironwork curling in balconies and gates, proof that even cold metal could be made beautiful. The Industrial Revolution had found its muse and its muscle. Of course, beauty came at a cost. The furnaces demanded coal, and coal demanded miners. Thousands descended underground every day, boys barely into their teens, men old before their time. Down there, in the choking dark, they chipped away at the veins of the earth to feed the insatiable hunger above. The air was thick with dust, the tunnels slick and treacherous. Cave-ins were common, explosions too. Each lump of coal that fueled an engine carried the weight of human lungs behind it. Each gleaming rail was a line drawn with sweat and risk. Progress, it seemed, was always bought in human coin. Still, there was no stopping it. The Iron Kingdom had taken root, and it was expanding fast. By mid-century, rail lines spidered across continents, London to Edinburgh, Paris to Lyon, New York to Chicago. Across hills, through tunnels, over bridges. The rhythm of the train became the pulse of the modern world. People timed their lives by the timetables. Whole towns sprang up beside the tracks. Commerce, culture, and communication began to move at the speed of steam. It was intoxicating, this feeling that humanity had finally harnessed motion itself. The railways even changed how people thought. Suddenly time needed precision. In the age before trains, noon was whatever your local church bell decided it was. But when locomotives began running on strict schedules, chaos ensued. One town's noon was another's 12:07. And so the world invented standard time. The sun no longer ruled the day, the timetable did. The clock, once just a household decoration, became a weapon of efficiency. A train delayed by 3 minutes was now a national concern. Iron, it seemed, had not just reshaped the land, it had reshaped time itself. Of course, not everyone welcomed it. Poets mourned the loss of silence. Farmers cursed the noise and soot that rained onto their fields. There were protests, lawsuits, and superstitions. Some believed the trains would suffocate passengers. Others said cows would stop giving milk if they heard one pass. But progress doesn't pause for poetry. The trains kept coming, the factories kept forging, and soon even the skeptics were boarding, clutching tickets with shaking hands, hearts pounding as the engine screamed to life. There was awe in those early rides. Passengers leaned out the windows, hair whipped by the wind, faces streaked with soot and wonder. They watched villages blur into watercolor landscapes. They crossed bridges that seemed to defy gravity. It was speed, yes, but it was also power. The realization that mankind could bend distance, command motion, and mold the very elements into obedience. Iron made people feel invincible. But the Iron Kingdom, like all kingdoms, carried shadows too. The same metal that built bridges also built cannons. The same technology that carried families also carried armies. The railways that united countries could just as easily mobilize wars. Progress was never pure. It was practical. And iron, though loyal, had no conscience. Still, for a brief, glittering moment, the world seemed full of promise. Cities shone with gaslights, engines roared like titans, bridges arched like prayers, and beneath it all ran the steady rhythm of iron wheels on rails. A lullaby for an age that could no longer stand still. By the end of the 19th century, the Iron Kingdom was everywhere, from London's fog to India's plains, from the coal towns of Wales to the rising cities of America. Steel tracks crisscrossed the planet like veins. Humanity had built itself a circulatory system of progress, pulsing with steam and ambition. Distance had been defeated. The future was in motion. And as the smoke curled into the night sky, glowing orange in the furnace light, the world took one more deep, mechanical breath, unaware that its next revolution was already waiting in the wings, one powered not by steam or iron, but by electricity and speed. Down below, where sunlight is just a rumor, men and boys move through tunnels no wider than their shoulders. Their lamps flicker, tiny halos of oil and flame swallowed by the dark. Pickaxes swing in slow rhythm, striking the earth's ribs, breaking off chunks of its black heart. The world above hums with progress, but it's this place, damp, echoing and endless, where that hum begins. Coal. The word rolls heavy on the tongue, as if even saying it leaves a trace of soot behind. It fuels the furnaces, feeds the locomotives, and keeps the iron monsters awake. Every puff of smoke that curls above a city skyline starts here, in the breath of men coughing black dust. Coal isn't found, it's earned. The miners work bent double, crawling through narrow seams that crush the air out of their lungs. Their hands are raw, their faces streaked with grime. A single candle lights the way, but it's enough. They know the tunnels by memory, by the feel of stone under palm, by the creak of timber warning them to move before the ceiling gives way. A good day means you come back up alive. A great day means your lungs still let you laugh. Outside, the factory owners speak of industry, of progress and prosperity. They build grand houses with wide windows, kind that never have to open to the smell of coal smoke. They talk of innovation while entire families underground trade daylight for a day's wage. Still, the world runs on their labor. Every train that screams across the countryside does so on powdered darkness. Every factory chimney, every steamship crossing the Atlantic burns the same black promise. Coal becomes the currency of progress. It's not just an energy source, it's the pulse of an era. The more you dig, the faster the world turns. The wealthy talk about power, but down in the pits, men understand it more literally. Power is what burns in their hands, fills their lungs, stains their skin. It's the sound of pickaxes in rhythm, of carts creaking up from the depths, of the earth exhaling smoke. The planet itself feels alive, breathing heavy, sweating heat. Above ground, the evidence of coal is everywhere. The air grows darker by the decade. Towns once green are now grey. Laundry hung out to dry turns black before the day is over. Soot clings to walls, roofs, faces. The sky becomes a constant dusk, a ceiling painted in smoke. Factories run without pause, furnaces glowing day and night, iron and steam roaring together like a mechanical symphony. But with each new mill and engine, the cities choke a little more. The same coal that powers progress also poisons it. In London, fog becomes a living thing, thick, yellow, and heavy with coal dust. It crawls into homes, clings to curtains, coats every breath. People call it pea soup, half-jokingly, as if giving it a nickname makes it less deadly. Children cough through the night. Men wheeze through their 20s. The revolution burns, and everyone burns with it. Yet no one dares stop. Coal is too convenient, too powerful, too deeply woven into the world's new machinery. It lights lamps, warms hearths, drives ships across oceans. It turns darkness into productivity. For the first time in history, humanity can work not by the rise of the sun, but by the turn of a switch. Midnight becomes just another shift. Factories roar long after stars appear. Trains cut through the night like fire-breathing beasts. Ships powered by coal's fury carry cotton, tea, and dreams to every corner of empire. The entire world begins to thrum in time with the rhythm of combustion. You can stand in the heart of a city and hear it. The endless rumble of coal-fed progress. But for every gleaming city street, there's a mining town living in shadow. Whole generations grow up underground. Fathers, sons, brothers. Faces so blackened that only the whites of their eyes gleam in lamplight. They sing to keep the fear away, simple songs rhythmic and haunting, bouncing off the stone walls as they dig deeper. Sometimes the earth swallows them whole. A spark in the wrong place, a pocket of gas unsealed, and everything explodes. Fire racing through tunnels faster than breath. Above ground, the wives and children wait, counting the hours, then the days. The mine entrance becomes a silent altar of grief. Still, when the smoke clears, someone always goes back down. There's no choice. Coal is life, coal is rent, coal is survival. The machines, too, are hungry for it. Steam engines demand constant feeding, a fireman shoveling coal by the ton just to keep the pistons moving. The rhythm of progress sounds like metal and muscle, shovel, scrape, hiss, roar. It's mesmerizing, like this illusion of control, this belief that humanity has mastered fire. But in truth, it's a delicate truce. For every miracle of invention, there's a whisper of danger, an explosion in the boiler room, a mine collapse, a factory fire that devours a block in minutes. Coal gives, but it always takes something back. The skies grow darker, the rivers run black. The cities glow orange at night, not from sunset, but from the constant burn of furnaces. Painters of the time begin to capture it, the landscapes of industry. Rolling hills turn to slag heaps, sunsets blurred by smoke. Beauty and ruin sharing the same horizon. Some call it progress, others call it madness. Both are right. And yet even in the grime, there's awe. To stand beside a roaring furnace, to feel the heat on your skin, to see the molten glow. It's impossible not to feel the weight of human ambition. From fire came tools, engines, empires. The world feels limitless, alive, spinning faster with each shovelful of coal. People begin to dream in smoke. They build cathedrals of industry, vast foundries and mills that echo with thunder. They believe they've harnessed the earth itself, turned its ancient bones into motion. They are not wrong. But the air grows heavier each year. Children in the cities sketch black clouds instead of blue skies. Rivers that once ran clear now carry the taste of ash. The cost of progress is visible on every surface, brick, skin, and sky alike. And still the world hungers for more. The fire won't be enough forever, though no one knows it yet. Deep in laboratories and workshops, new ideas begin to flicker. Invisible, weightless, cleaner. Electricity hums faintly at the edges of possibility, waiting its turn. The world begins to hum. not from the hiss of steam in a single factory, but from the long, low thunder of wheels on iron. Steel rails slice across the countryside, gleaming, straight, and unstoppable. They cut through meadows, farms, and forgotten fields like veins of progress, carrying the pulse of an age that refuses to stand still. The first time you hear it, you don't forget. A whistle, shrill and otherworldly, echoing over hills. Then the deep, rhythmic chug of pistons firing in perfect timing. And finally, a great black engine bursts through the morning mist, smoke billowing like a storm cloud, pulling behind it a string of carriages that seem to stretch forever. To watch a train in the 1800s is to witness power itself made visible. Steam becomes motion, fire becomes speed. The machine roars and the earth trembles beneath it. The age of distance is ending. For centuries, a journey from London to Edinburgh meant days on horseback or carriage, mud and exhaustion, nights spent in draughty inns. Now steel and steam collapse those days into hours. People begin to measure their lives not in miles but in timetables. A farmer in Cornwall can send milk to a London market before it spoils. A lover can write a letter in Manchester and have it read in Glasgow the next morning. Ideas, once slow as the hoofbeat, now fly on rails. The world grows smaller, more connected, yet somehow larger too, its horizons expanding with every mile of track. The train stations rise like temples. Arches of iron and glass stretch above the platforms, sunlight filtering through soot-stained panes. Clocks hang from every wall, their ticking now sacred, because time is no longer local. The train runs on schedule, not sunrise. Passengers wait in orderly lines, merchants with their ledgers, families with trunks, soldiers, students, dreamers. Steam curls around their feet as conductors shout destinations that sound like promises. Bristol, Birmingham, Liverpool, every name a door to somewhere else. The locomotives themselves become living creatures. Black, glistening with oil, panting clouds of steam. They hiss, snort, and whistle like beasts impatient to run. Engineers treat them like proud steeds, polishing their brass, checking gauges, stoking fires until the furnace glows white-hot. There's poetry in their rhythm, the way pistons pump and wheels spin, how the rails sing beneath the weight. Villagers stop their work just to watch the great machines thunder past, their washing fluttering in the smoke's wake. Children wave, farmers pause midfield, shading their eyes. Old men shake their heads, muttering that the world's moving too fast. But progress doesn't ask permission. Soon railways stitch the country together, iron threads weaving a new kind of map. Coal from the north feeds southern factories. Cotton from the ports races inland. Goods that once crawled along muddy roads now fly across steel in endless motion. Commerce itself begins to move at the speed of steam. The railways are not just transportation, they are transformation. Small towns that once sat quietly in the green are suddenly alive with the sound of whistles and trade. New cities rise around stations, their streets paved with ambition. Inns become hotels, stables become depots. Entire communities exist simply because a line happens to pass nearby. The empire stretches its iron fingers farther every year, across hills, over rivers, through tunnels carved by hand. The labor that builds this web is brutal. Navvies and the railway workers dig, blast, and lay, track mile after mile. They are mostly young, poor, and Irish, strong-backed men with calloused hands and mud-streaked faces. They sleep in rough camps, eat bread and beer for dinner, and wake before dawn to hammer steel into the earth. Accidents are common. Blasts misfire, bridges collapse, entire teams vanish into landslides or floods. But for every man lost, 10 more arrive, drawn by the promise of work, of food, of something better. Progress doesn't wait for the living. It moves forward over graves, relentless, and gleaming. The first time Queen Victoria herself takes the train, the world takes notice. It's 1842, her royal carriage is fitted with silk and gold, the engine polished to a mirror's shine. When the locomotive starts to move, even she flinches. The noise, the speed, the strange sensation of gliding without horses. By journey's end she's captivated, and that is that. If the Queen can ride the rails, so can everyone. Rail travel ceases to be a curiosity. It becomes a necessity. In the towns, people begin to live by the rhythm of the trains. Factories adjust their shifts to match arrivals. Newspapers print rail schedules on the front page. Time itself, once an inconsistent local affair, becomes standardized. Noon in London must now mean noon in Bristol, or the trains will crash. This simple need gives birth to the first synchronized time zones, the ticking heartbeat of modern life. The whistle at the station becomes the new church bell, summoning not worshippers but workers, travellers, lovers, parting and meeting again. And with every passing year, the trains grow faster, longer, stronger. They reach the ports, linking sea to land. Ships bring goods from India, China, and America, and railways carry them inland. Silk, sugar, tobacco, stories from faraway places. Empire itself becomes mechanized, a network of metal and motion. Steam doesn't just power industry, it powers imagination. Writers begin to dream of the future in iron and smoke. Children play with toy locomotives, their laughter echoing the rhythm of the rails. Artists paint trains streaking through mist, symbols of speed, ambition, and the strange new beauty of machinery. Every journey feels like proof that humanity can outpace nature. But the rails don't only carry goods and passengers, they carry something far more dangerous, ideas. Workers from distant towns meet and talk for the first time. Pamphlets about reform, rights, and revolution pass hand to hand across compartments. The same steel lines that spread trade also spread unrest. The Industrial Revolution, once confined to factories and smoke, now begins to move, whispering through the countryside, carried by the rhythm of the trains. Cities pulse with new voices, new thoughts, new demands. And while the rich look to expand the network, others look to change what it stands for. Yet, on quiet mornings before the first whistle, the rails themselves hold a kind of peace. They gleam under dew, stretching into the distance. Perfect, parallel, endless. You can stand beside them and feel the faint vibration before a train appears, a subtle tremor that reminds you the world is in motion. Somewhere far away, a man shovels coal into a firebox. Somewhere else, a clock strikes the hour. And soon, a faint hum rises on the horizon, growing louder, faster, until the landscape shakes with the force of the coming machine. Then it bursts into view, steel, smoke, and thunder rushing past like time itself made visible. For a moment, everything blurs, grass, sky, rails, all swallowed by motion. And when it's gone, silence returns. Only a trail of smoke lingers in the air, fading slowly, like the echo of a dream. The world has found its rhythm now, an industrial heartbeat that never rests. The train is its pulse, the rails its arteries, and the passengers its restless blood. Each journey connects another piece of the world, binding it tighter with iron threads. Distance collapses, speed becomes ordinary, and humanity, for the first time, begins to believe there's nowhere it can't go. The future is moving, fast and loud, and no one knows how to slow it down. The train tracks don't just carry people, they carry transformation. Everywhere they go, the world reshapes itself around them. What were once quiet hamlets and market towns begin to swell, pulsing with noise and smoke. Villages become towns, towns become cities, and cities, so become something new entirely. By the mid-1800s, London is no longer just a capital. It's a living organism, a breathing, grinding, soot-covered machine made of brick, ambition, and human sweat. Its lungs are the chimneys. Its veins are the streets. Its heartbeat is the factory whistle. The Industrial Revolution has built its kingdom, and the capital is chaos. You can smell a Victorian city before you see it. The air is thick, a damp stew of coal smoke, horse manure, and something metallic that clings to your tongue. It's not unpleasant exactly, just undeniable. The perfume of progress. The streets are narrow, choked with carts and crowds. Horses clatter past vendors shouting about bread, coal, or soap. Steam spills from factory vents curling around rooftops. In the distance, bells ring from a dozen churches, not in harmony, but in argument. Everywhere, movement. Men rush to work, collars stained with sweat and soot before sunrise. Women carry baskets of laundry through fog that never seems to lift. Children dart between carriages, barefoot, quick, invisible. There's no pause, no stillness. Cities don't sleep, they only change shifts. London leads the charge, but Manchester and Birmingham are right behind it, booming, sprawling, demanding more of everything. Manchester, once a modest market town, becomes the beating heart of global cotton. Rows of mills stretch along the canals, their windows glowing orange long into the night. The city hums with a mechanical rhythm, the clatter of looms and the hiss of steam blending into a kind of industrial music. Birmingham, the workshop of the world, forges its fortune in metal. Screws, buttons, engines, anything that can be cast, hammered, or riveted. The air itself feels heavier there, saturated with the smell of oil and molten iron. These cities grow so fast they forget to plan where to put people. Houses rise in tight, hasty rows, red brick, thin walls, no light. Tenements cram families into single rooms, their windows black with soot. The streets outside flood when it rains, and the drains overflow with things best left unmentioned. It's not uncommon to wake to the sound of coughing, the industrial lullaby of the poor. Water is shared, diseases are shared faster. Cholera stalks the alleys, striking without warning. Babies fade quietly in cradles as smoke curls through the cracks in the ceiling. And yet, life goes on, always. Because beneath all the grime and exhaustion, something extraordinary is happening. Humanity is learning to live in crowds. For thousands of years, people lived in small groups in villages where everyone knew everyone else's business. Now, for the first time, millions share the same streets without sharing names. Anonymous life. A new kind of existence, where you can vanish in the crowd, reinvent yourself, or never be noticed at all. The cities become experiments in scale. How close can people live before it breaks them? How many lives can be stacked atop one another before the foundation shakes? No one knows yet. They're still building, still trying, and not everyone suffers. The rich too build, but higher, cleaner, further from the smoke, while the poor sleep six to a bed. The wealthy commission mansions with marble staircases, gas lamps, and servants who move silently through halls big enough to echo. They stroll through parks built on land once worked by farmers, ride carriages down wide boulevards lined with gaslight, and speak of the poor like a weather pattern, unfortunate but inevitable. But even the rich can't escape the hum. The smoke finds its way into their parlours, settling on silk drapes and silver spoons. It reminds them, gently, constantly, that the city feeds them, and it's hungry. Everywhere, invention. Sewers stretch beneath the street, labyrinths of brick and darkness built to tame the tide of filth. Gas lamps flicker to life each night, turning midnight into something that almost resembles day. The telegraph begins to whisper across miles, carrying news faster than a man can travel. It feels like magic, but it's only science wearing its new clothes. The city becomes a living laboratory, a place where humanity tests what it can build, endure, and imagine. Engineers, architects, chemists, dreamers, all of them find their stage here. And each new marvel feeds another. You can almost feel the acceleration, like the world itself is gathering speed. Of course, progress has its price. Every miracle casts a shadow, and in the streets of London or Manchester, that shadow is poverty. Children with hollow eyes selling matches by gaslight. Women washing laundry until their hands bleed. Men coughing black dust into rags. The city doesn't stop for them. It doesn't stop for anyone. There are charities, reformers, preachers, people who write pamphlets, who demand change, who visit the slums in clean shoes and come out haunted. But the machine keeps turning, fueled by bodies and belief. For every law passed, another factory opens. For every sermon preached, another chimney rises. Still the whispers of reform grow louder, because once people live shoulder to shoulder, they start comparing lives. And when you see the mansion across the river while you sleep in a cellar, it becomes harder to believe in divine fairness. The city doesn't just breed invention, it breeds awareness. And then there's the noise. Not just the sound of factories, but the endless murmur of humanity. The shouting, the laughter, the clash of hooves on cobblestone, the cries of merchants, the hiss of steam, the ringing of church bells, the rattle of carriages, the coughing, the singing, the living roar of millions learning to coexist. It's overwhelming and intoxicating at once. Some people escape to the countryside and swear never to return. Others arrive with nothing but a suitcase and a dream and swear they'll never leave. Because buried beneath the soot and the sorrow, the city offers something no village ever could: possibility. If you're clever, lucky, or relentless, you can rise here. You can start as a factory boy and end up owning the mill. You can invent something in your shed and change the world. You can vanish into a crowd or make that same crowd remember. The city is cruel, but it's alive, and for many, that's enough. By night, the skyline glows faintly, a halo of orange over rooftops. Smoke drifts upward, softening the stars. Couples stroll by the river, workers stumble home half asleep, and the gas lamps cast their trembling halos on wet cobblestone. If you listen closely, you can hear the machinery even from here, distant, constant, breathing. The countryside has gone quiet. The heart of the world now beats in brick and iron. And as the century marches forward, the cities will only grow. Taller, louder, brighter, more dangerous, more human. The Industrial Revolution is no longer just invention, it's identity. And soon, those teeming streets will demand something new: order, reform, and rights. The machine has learned to live. Now, it must learn to care. Morning in the factory districts doesn't begin with birdsong. It begins with coughing, thin, dry, persistent, a sound that belongs more to age than to youth. But here, it comes from children. The streets are still damp from last night's fog when they start walking. Tiny figures in oversized rags clutching bread crusts, eyes glazed with sleep. They move like ghosts, quiet, practiced, knowing every shortcut to the mill or the mine. They don't talk much. There's no time for that. By sunrise, they've vanished inside the factories, swallowed by steam, dust, and noise. Inside, the world is a different kind of weather. Hotter, louder, meaner. The air tastes like oil and metal. The floor shakes beneath their feet, and the machines never stop. They roar like beasts with endless hunger. The children feed them thread, coal, grease, sometimes blood. Some crawl under looms to clear lint from the gears while the belts are still spinning. Some haul buckets of coal so heavy they have to drag them on the floor. Some climb inside chimneys, scraping soot until their knuckles bleed black. A wrong move, a loose sleeve, a second's distraction, and the machine reminds them that flesh is soft and replaceable. In the textile mills of Manchester, the girls are the quickest. Their small fingers can tie broken threads faster than any man's. They work 12, sometimes 14 hours, bent over rattling looms. The lint floats in the air like snow, soft and deadly. It fills lungs, dulls breath, and leaves them coughing by 10, wheezing by 20. They sing sometimes, not because they're happy, but because rhythm helps time move faster. 1 verse per bobbin, 2 for a spool. A lullaby for labour. In the coal mines of Yorkshire and South Wales, the boys learn darkness early. They're called trappers, and their job is simple and terrifying. They sit alone in the tunnels, opening and closing heavy wooden doors to control the airflow. Hours at a time, alone in blackness, so complete they can't see their own hands. They grow up knowing the sound of dripping water, distant picks, and the echo of their own breathing. When the foreman's lamp finally appears, it looks like sunrise. Some never see the surface again. The tunnels cave in, the lamps go out, the earth swallows its children quietly. But to the world above, it's just progress. Factories hum, ships sail, cities glow brighter. Cotton fills the warehouses, coal feeds the furnaces, and profit pours in like clockwork. Newspapers print numbers, not names. The economy booms, and the hands that make it happen, small, cracked, invisible, keep moving. The empire runs on them, not steam, not iron, hands. Occasionally, someone notices. A poet visits a mill and writes a verse that makes gentle society weep. A reformer takes notes in the mines, horrified at the faces he finds beneath the soot. A politician makes a speech full of outrage and virtue. But when the applause fades, the factories are still running, the looms still spin, and the next morning the children still walk. Some of them don't even call it cruelty. It's just life. Parents send their children to work because they must. Because rent is due, because bread is scarce, because another day off means another day hungry. A family of 6 might live on what one factory child earns. Barely. And so love itself becomes complicit. Mothers press kisses onto foreheads already lined with soot and send them back into the noise. Fathers teach sons to shovel faster, climb higher, endure longer. It isn't malice. It's survival, wrapped in the language of duty. The reformers call it exploitation. The factory owners call it opportunity. They say the work teaches discipline, keeps the poor from idleness. They argue that the children are lucky, that they'd be starving otherwise, and maybe in a way they're right. That's the cruelty of it. Because when the world leaves you 2 bad choices, even misery starts to look like mercy. Sometimes, though, the system cracks. A machine breaks and the owners find a child's hand inside. A mine floods and the bodies pulled out are too small to carry properly. A journalist sneaks a story into print, one that can't be politely ignored. The nation stirs. The polite classes sip their tea and frown. Could it really be so bad? Yes, it could. And it is. The factory acts arrive slowly, reluctantly, like apologies whispered through gritted teeth. First, they limit hours. Not too harshly, of course. Then they require schools, though half the children never go. Then inspectors are hired, though most mills learn to hide the worst before inspection day. Progress comes, but it limps. The laws are ink on paper, the soot is still in the lungs. Yet change, once begun, is hard to stop. In the slums, mothers start to whisper that their children deserve more than hunger and fatigue. In the newspapers, readers start to demand answers. Even in Parliament, there are a few voices who speak not for profit but for humanity. The machine still roars, but now, beneath it, there's another sound. Quieter, persistent, dissent. It's the sound of a world beginning to realize that progress without compassion isn't progress at all. And the children, the ones who survive, grow up different. Some carry the limp of crushed fingers or the rasp of coal dust in their lungs. Some leave the factories and never look back. Some stay, because where else can they go? They learn to laugh again, marry, have children of their own. But deep down, they remember the noise, the heat, the darkness. And when their children are old enough, they hesitate before sending them out the door. That hesitation is the start of something new, fragile but real. Outside the mills, a storm is brewing. The workers are learning their strength. Unions whisper in taverns, pamphlets circulate under candlelight. Words like rights, dignity, and fair pay begin to spread. Dangerous ideas that threaten the empire of soot. The revolution that began with machines is about to meet one born of people. A human engine powered not by coal, but by outrage. Because after centuries of silence, the laborers, and even the smallest ones, are about to find their voice. The whistle blows, another shift begins. The streets fill once more with the rhythm of footsteps, tiny, steady, resigned. But this time, something's changed. A murmur moves through the crowd, quiet but contagious. A sense that maybe, just maybe, this world can be rebuilt. And somewhere, in a factory filled with smoke and iron, a man pauses at his loom and looks up. He's not sure why, but for the first time, he wonders if the machine could stop, even for a day. History doesn't always move in armies. Sometimes it moves in drafts and sketches where you see ink-stained hands and sleepless eyes staring at something that doesn't exist yet. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just a storm of iron and steam. It was a symphony of human obsession. Every hiss of a piston, every flicker of a gas lamp, every whistle from a train began as someone's wild, ridiculous idea. In cramped attics, smoky workshops, and borrowed barns, a new kind of hero emerged. Not kings, not soldiers, but tinkerers. Men and women who looked at the impossible and thought, maybe. Take James Watt. Not the first man to play with steam, but the one who saw how to make it useful. His mind worked like a furnace, restless, hot, and always hungry. He wasn't trying to start a revolution, he was trying to fix a leaky pump. Yet from that tiny act of curiosity came a machine that could power a world. When he improved the steam engine in the 1760s, he didn't just make mining easier, he gave humanity its first real taste of unlimited power. The age of muscle and wind was over. The age of steam had arrived. And then there was George Stephenson, a man born into the dirt and smoke of the mines. He couldn't read until he was an adult, but he could read machines like poetry. Stephenson's hands knew metal like a musician knows strings. In 1829, his locomotive, the Rocket, roared down the tracks faster than anyone had ever moved before. People gasped, some fainted, some swore the human body wasn't built to survive such speed. But they survived, and they never wanted to go slow again. Every inventor of this age shared a sickness, the fever of what if. Richard Arkwright, for example, wasn't a scientist, but a barber who saw profit in precision. He figured out how to spin cotton with machines instead of hands, building the first true factory system. Suddenly, production didn't depend on daylight or patience. It depended on gears. There's something almost tragic about their brilliance. Most of them worked not for glory, but for necessity. Watt was broke, Stephenson was mocked. Arkwright was hated by the spinners he replaced. But invention rarely cares about comfort. It thrives on friction between need and dream, between poverty and genius, and they weren't alone. Behind them, an invisible army of thinkers emerged. Joseph Priestley discovered oxygen, but nearly lost his life to mobs who thought him a heretic. Humphrey Davy played with lightning in bottles, inventing the miner's safety lamp to keep men alive underground. And his apprentice, a poor boy named Michael Faraday, would one day change the very rules of energy. Faraday's experiments with electricity and magnetism didn't just light lamps. They lit the path to the modern world. Inventions bred more inventions. The telegraph, for instance, turned silence into speech. In 1837, when Samuel Morse sent his first electric message, a short pulse of dots and dashes, the world shrank a little. Thoughts could now travel faster than horses. Cities became connected minds and empires became nervous systems. What's easy to forget, though, is how fragile it all was. Many of these breakthroughs were born in debt, ridicule, or despair. For every Stephenson or Watt, there were hundreds of nameless mechanics whose creations never made it past the workshop door. A gear off by a millimeter, a piston too weak, a patent stolen, and a dream vanished into the smog. But still they tried. They kept sketching, hammering, testing, because invention isn't really about success. It's about not being able to stop. The spirit of the time was electric, even before electricity itself was understood. Everyone wanted to build something, not just things but futures. There was the self-taught engineer who built clocks that ran for decades without winding. The chemist who mixed strange potions hoping to turn coal gas into light. The farm boy who tinkered with a broken plough until it became the prototype for a machine that could feed millions. It wasn't just about machines either. Ideas themselves began to evolve. The world started to believe that progress was infinite, that each discovery was only a stepping stone to the next. It was intoxicating, almost religious. The factory became the new cathedral, the inventor its high priest. And yet obsession came with shadows. For every genius inspired, there were workers exhausted. For every new tool, a new dependency. The more machines humans built, the more they became machine-like, precise, repetitive, replaceable. The same gears that turned mills also turned minds. Still, progress rolled on. Even poets felt it. Shelley, Byron, Blake, writing both in awe and terror of this new, mechanical world. Blake called the factories dark, satanic mills, but even he couldn't look away. There was something hypnotic about the rhythm of it all. Pistons, clocks, trains, a heartbeat made of metal. And that heartbeat was speeding up. Soon, inventions would no longer be solitary miracles. They would become systems, industries feeding industries. The steam engine powered factories that built rails that carried coal to ships that carried machines across oceans. The web tightened, and humanity was now tangled in its own creation. Somewhere in all this noise, an inventor would stare out a window, his hands black with grease, and realize the world he lived in was already unrecognizable from the one he was born into. And yet, the human hunger to push further hadn't dimmed, not even close. Because soon, the machines themselves would multiply. Steel would harden, cities would roar louder, and the empire of smoke would reach for the skies. The dreamers had done their part. They'd built the engines. Now the engines would build the world. The hiss of steam fades into the clatter of progress. Invention gives way to industry. And somewhere, beyond the factories and fog, the next chapter of the revolution begins. Written not with ink, but with soot and sweat. The factories of Britain didn't just make goods. They made ambition. The hum of spinning wheels and the hiss of steam engines became a kind of war drum. echoing far beyond the fog-soaked cities where it began. Once, Britain traded wool and tea. Now it traded power. The Industrial Revolution had turned the island into a forge and the rest of the world into raw material. By the early 19th century, smoke from Manchester's mills didn't stop at the city's edge. It drifted across seas and borders, carried by ships stuffed with cloth, iron, and hunger. Every new machine demanded more cotton, more coal, more metal, more people to sell to. And when the home island couldn't supply it, the empire simply looked outward. It's strange to think that the same steam that turned factory wheels also powered the engines of empire. Steamships began to cut through oceans faster than the wind could carry a sail. Ironclads replaced wooden galleons. Canals, ports, and telegraph cables stitched the continents together into something resembling a nervous system, with London as its throbbing brain. In India, in Africa, in the Caribbean, smoke followed the flag. Cotton plantations fed Lancashire's looms. Sugar-sweetened tea brewed in porcelain cups stamped "Made in England." The empire wasn't built by soldiers alone, but by ledgers, invoices, and machines. Industry and imperialism danced together, one feeding the other, neither ever satisfied. Factories needed raw materials. Colonies provided them. Colonies, in turn, were forced to buy back the finished goods they'd helped create. A perfect loop of dependency, efficient, elegant, ruthless. Somewhere in London a banker smiled. Somewhere in Calcutta a weaver wept. Back home, few questioned it. The Industrial Revolution had given Britain wealth beyond imagination. Cities glowed with gaslight, railways crisscrossed the island, and even the middle class began to dream of comfort. Progress was the new religion, and empire its cathedral. But beneath the polished silver and steam there was a darker hum, the low thrum of exploitation. The same drive that made inventors tinker with gears also made merchants tinker with borders. The British East India Company wasn't just a business, it was a machine of conquest. It had its own army, its own laws, its own flag. The line between commerce and control blurred until they became the same thing. India's fertile lands became fields of profit. Cotton, indigo, tea, all grown not for the people who lived there, but for distant markets and foreign wealth. The local industries that once thrived, the spinners, the artisans, crumbled under the weight of factory-made imports. Generations of craftsmanship reduced to ghosts by gears, and still the empire grew. Africa was carved up like a map on a dinner table, its people and land reduced to resources. Railways were laid not for travel, but for extraction. Straight lines from mines to ports, from labor to profit. In the name of progress, whole nations were bent into shape. Meanwhile, at home, the British press printed stories of glory and civilization. Paintings showed explorers planting flags in unknown lands, as though the people living there had been invisible until now. Steamships carried missionaries beside merchants, the Bible beside the barrel. Empire became a moral project, justified by industry, sanctified by invention. But not everyone was fooled. In the drawing rooms of London and the back alleys of Manchester, voices began to murmur. Poets and politicians, workers and widows, all began to wonder if the price of progress had grown too steep. The wealth of the empire sparkled, but its foundation was built on the tired backs of men, women, and children thousands of miles away. And even within Britain's borders, the empire's shadow stretched long. Irish fields starved to feed English markets. Welsh coal miners dug deeper to keep the trains running. Scottish shipyards built the vessels that carried empire abroad and brought its burdens home. Industrial might had made Britain the workshop of the world, but it also made it a machine that could not stop. The 19th century became an age of contradictions, of optimism and oppression, of enlightenment and exploitation. Steam engines and slavery coexisted. telegraphs and tyranny shared the same pulse. A world connected by invention found new ways to divide itself. Yet, for all its cruelty, the empire did something extraordinary. It made the world smaller. A letter could cross an ocean in weeks instead of months. News of revolutions, discoveries, and disasters traveled faster than ever. Cultures collided, languages mixed, ideas spread. Globalization, a word we think of as modern, was already humming beneath the decks of steamships and inside the telegraph wires strung across deserts. And the British weren't alone. Other nations saw the smoke and wanted their share. France industrialized. Germany industrialized. The United States, once a colony itself, became a factory giant. The race for machines became a race for dominance. Trade routes became front lines. Back in the cities, ordinary people barely noticed the global chess game their labor powered. They worked the looms, shoveled the coal, and built the rails that carried empire on their backs. For them, the world didn't feel smaller. It felt heavier. The rich traveled to colonies for adventure. The poor were shipped there for punishment. Convicts built new worlds in Australia. Soldiers died for invisible borders in Africa. And the smoke from Manchester kept rising, a grey flag that never stopped waving. By the late 1800s, the empire stretched across continents. They said the sun never set on it. But if you asked the workers in the mills or the miners in India, they might have told you the sun never rose either. Still, humanity pushed forward, blind to the long shadow it was casting. The telegraph wires buzzed, the engines roared, the ships kept sailing. And somewhere, in a lab filled with strange smells and brighter lights, a new kind of power was being born. One that didn't need coal or steam at all, because the world's hunger was growing, and so was its arrogance. The machine of empire had conquered land. Now it would try to conquer nature itself. And as the 19th century drew to its noisy close, the air hummed with something new: electricity. The next revolution was already flickering in the dark, waiting for the switch to be flipped. The steam never stopped. It seeped into everything, the walls, the streets, the lungs. By now, the world itself seemed to breathe in piston beats and clockwork rhythm. You could stand in the middle of Manchester or Birmingham or Glasgow and feel it, that low, mechanical heartbeat that never slept. Factories weren't just buildings anymore. They were worlds. Whole ecosystems of iron and sweat where daylight came filtered through soot, and the sound of hammers became a kind of lullaby. The people inside them were the moving parts, the living gears that made the empire turn. A bell rang, and the day began. Another bell, and it ended. Between the two there was no difference between man and machine, only the illusion of choice. The rhythm of life changed in the industrial age. Once, time was guided by nature, the rising sun, the harvest moon, the changing seasons. But now it was measured by whistles and shifts, by the click of a punch card, by the turning of gears. You could hear it in the streets, the echo of boots on cobblestone, as thousands of workers flooded through factory gates like clockwork soldiers. They carried tin lunches, tired faces, and the same quiet acceptance that this was progress, even if it didn't always feel like it. Inside it was hot. Not the warmth of summer, but the kind that felt alive, metallic, oily, relentless. The air itself seemed to hum. Machines whirred and clanked, their belts snapping and spinning with dangerous precision. A moment's distraction could mean a missing hand, a crushed limb, or worse. And yet the workers stayed. They had to. Machines could be replaced. People couldn't afford to be. It was a strange irony. The more efficient machines became, the more human bodies were needed to keep them running. The workers oiled the gears, carried the coal, fed the looms. Progress demanded a price, and it was paid in muscle, bone, and breath. Children still worked too. They fit easily under the machines, crawling where adults could not, tying threads and sweeping dust. Their small hands could move faster, and their small pay kept profits fat. For them, childhood was not a stage of life. It was a short pause before exhaustion. And yet there was a kind of grim pride among workers. They built the engines that drove nations, the bridges that crossed rivers, the rails that carried kings. Their fingerprints were pressed into the very bones of modernity, though history rarely remembered their names. The Industrial Revolution had turned the human body into a unit of production. Muscles became motors, eyes became sensors. Sleep became an inconvenience. Even rest was measured. A few hours before the next bell, doctors began to study factory fatigue, a new kind of illness born from repetition and overwork. Men coughed black. Women fainted at looms, fingers blistered, spines twisted, lungs filled with dust. The human machine, it turned out, was not built to run without pause. But progress didn't care. There were always more workers waiting outside the gates. If one broke, another would take their place. The machines needed tending, and the market never slept. Managers carried stopwatches now. Every motion had to count, every second had to matter. Frederick Taylor, the father of scientific management, would later codify this obsession, breaking human labor into measurable mechanical steps. He called it efficiency. Workers called it dehumanization. And yet, even as they were turned into numbers, people adapted. They formed unions, whispered solidarity between shifts, shared bread, stories, and sometimes rebellion. Humanity, beaten down, always found a way to breathe again. Still, for most, life was lived on repeat. Wake, work, sleep, repeat. The factory bell became the new church bell, calling not to prayer, but to production. Sundays were brief reprieves, often spent sleeping off the week's exhaustion. And even then, the sound of machines haunted dreams, the hiss of steam, the clatter of looms, the endless turning of wheels. The city itself seemed alive, a giant organism powered by human labor. Gaslights flickered in fog-drenched streets. Coal smoke hung like a permanent twilight. The poor crowded into tenements, stacked like filing cabinets, where families of 6 might share one damp room. The smell of sweat and soot mixed with bread and despair. Yet even amid the grime, there was wonder. People marveled at what they'd built. Railways that crossed nations, bridges that defied rivers, ships that swallowed oceans. It was beautiful in a brutal way. Progress forged through suffering, invention paid for with exhaustion. Every new machine promised to make life easier, but somehow it always made it faster instead. The looms spun more, so the workers had to spin more. The train moved quicker, so schedules tightened. Every invention solved a problem and created another. In the drawing rooms of the wealthy, the industrial age was celebrated as triumph. Progress, prosperity, productivity, the holy trinity of the modern world. But in the back alleys behind those bright windows, the price of that progress piled up like coal dust. The human machine wasn't just a metaphor anymore, it was a system. Schools trained children to obey bells, clocks ruled households, even leisure was scheduled, rationed, optimized. It was no longer about survival, it was about synchronization. People learned to move in time with industry, to measure their worth by output. And yet cracks began to show. Writers and artists, Dickens, Blake, Engels, looked at the factories and saw not glory, but ghosts. The dark, satanic mills, they called them, cathedrals of progress that devoured their worshippers. Still the machine rolled on. You could hear it even at night. The distant hum of power, the grind of gears beneath the stars. It was as if the earth itself had learned to tick, to pulse, to count. And somewhere in that rhythm, something fundamental was changing. people began to see themselves differently, not as individuals shaped by land and season, but as parts of a system that never stopped moving. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change what humans made, it changed what humans were. The farmer became a worker, the craftsman became a cog, the day became a shift. The world, once ruled by nature, now bowed to the machine. And as the century turned and the factories grew louder, another kind of power began to glow in the darkness, one that didn't need steam or coal or muscle. Electric light flickered to life. The night, once sacred to rest, was conquered by brightness. And soon the machine would never sleep again. It starts as a whisper. It always does. In the smoke-choked alleys and overpacked tenements, beneath the clamor of factory bells and the hiss of steam, people begin to murmur. About hours too long, wages too low, children too tired. About the bosses who count their profits while their workers cough black. About fairness, a small, fragile word, but one that spreads faster than soot. The same cities that built the Industrial Revolution now begin to hum with something different. Unrest. Not rebellion, not yet. But something's shifting, like the first tremor before a quake. Inside those endless factories, a thought begins to circulate between the rattle of looms and the grind of gears. What if it didn't have to be this way? The men and women who once marched to the rhythm of machines start marching for themselves. After decades of being treated like moving parts, they start remembering that they are, in fact, human. Meetings begin in the quiet corners of taverns, in rented rooms behind bakeries, in fields on Sunday afternoons when the overseers aren't watching. The talk is dangerous. Words like union and strike are whispered like contraband. Organizing workers in those days isn't a right, it's a risk. But still they gather. Coal miners from Wales, textile workers from Manchester, matchstick girls from London. They've all had enough of 14-hour days and 6-day weeks of broken fingers and empty stomachs. And so begins the slow burn of reform. The first unions form like flickering candles in a storm. Fragile, easily snuffed out, but determined to keep burning. They demand limits, 10-hour days, safer machines, cleaner air. For the first time, workers are not just feeding the fire of progress, they're trying to control it. Employers call them radicals, the press calls them troublemakers, but history will call them something else entirely, necessary. The strikes begin quietly. One mill shuts down, then another. The air fills not just with smoke, but with slogans and song. Protesters march through streets where the smell of industry is thick as ever, their voices echoing off the same red brick walls that once swallowed them in silence. And though the rich scoff, calling it chaos, calling it ingratitude, the cracks are forming. Child labor becomes impossible to ignore. Reports are published, grim accounts of little bodies twisted by machinery, of 10-year-olds working night shifts, of fingers lost to progress. The factory acts follow, slow and imperfect, but they begin to draw lines where none existed before. A 10-hour workday, no children under 9 in factories, mandatory inspections, tiny victories, but victories nonetheless. The idea of rest, once a luxury, becomes a right worth fighting for. Sunday is reclaimed not just for worship, but for breathing. And in the midst of it all, women rise too. Mill girls and matchstick workers who'd been treated as expendable suddenly become impossible to ignore. The Match Girls' strike of 1888, led by teenage girls covered in phosphorus burns, becomes a spark of its own. They refuse to work until conditions change, and miraculously they win. Their courage spreads. Across Europe and America, workers see that the machine can be stopped, even if only for a moment. It's not just a labor movement, it's a reawakening of humanity inside an age that had nearly mechanized it out of existence. And of course, progress fights back. Police break strikes. Newspapers mock reformers as dreamers or communists. But dreamers, as it turns out, are hard to silence. Karl Marx writes from London's smoky cafes, calling for revolution. Engels describes the misery of Manchester's slums with brutal honesty. Their ideas are dangerous, but intoxicating. For the first time, workers begin to see the system not as fate, but as design, and designs can be changed. By now, the factory owner isn't the only one watching the clock. The worker is too, but for different reasons. Each tick of the minute hand feels like a count of their stolen time, and so the whisper becomes a voice. The voice becomes a chorus. The working class, once faceless, finds its face, tired, determined, and unflinching. They march with banners stitched from old sheets. They carry portraits of reformers and martyrs. They sing songs not of war, but of work, of rights, of being seen. And though progress is slow, painfully so, it moves forward, as it always does, inch by inch. The great reform acts reshape politics. The Chartists demand the vote for all men, not just the wealthy few. In Parliament, voices rise in defence of the worker, and though they are outnumbered, they are no longer alone. The streets begin to change too. Child labour laws tighten, education spreads. The same children who once crawled under machines now learn to read about the world they helped build. Literacy becomes liberation. Factories start to clean up, if only because the people inside them refuse to die quietly anymore. Inspectors roam the floors, measuring not just output, but air quality. The concept of worker welfare, once absurd, begins to sound reasonable. And still, in the shadows of progress, poverty lingers. Not everyone is saved. Not everyone can afford to fight. But the idea has taken root, and ideas are harder to crush than people. Newspapers print stories of strikes and speeches. Pamphlets circulate, cheap and furious. A movement becomes a culture. And somewhere in the distance, the world listens. Across the Atlantic, America begins to stir with its own labor battles. France, Germany, Russia, all feel the tremor of change that began in Britain's smoky streets. The Industrial Revolution, which once promised endless progress, now stares at its own reflection and wonders what kind of creature it has become. Even the wealthy begin to see the cracks in their creation. Philanthropists build schools, libraries, hospitals. They call it charity, others call it guilt. But either way, the world is learning that the cost of unchecked progress isn't just soot in the sky, it's the suffering of millions. And yet through all the turmoil, the machine keeps running. Trains thunder across the countryside, ships churn through oceans, factories hum like restless giants. But something subtle has shifted in the air. It's not just power now, it's conscience. The people who once built the machine are learning to demand a say in how it runs. And though the smoke still hangs heavy over the cities, you can feel it. That spark of change. A spark that will grow into revolutions of its own, in rights, in representation, in the very idea of what a worker is worth. And somewhere, in a quiet workshop or crowded home, someone dreams not of machines, but of meaning, of progress that lifts rather than crushes. Because once the spark catches, even the thickest fog of coal can't put it out. The air begins to change, you can feel it. That faint hum under the skin of the century. The hiss of steam doesn't fade entirely, but something subtler and sharper takes its place. Wires stretch across cities like veins of light, and the world begins to glow after dark. You stand at the threshold of a new kind of magic, and the kind that doesn't burn coal or boil water, but travels invisibly through copper, electricity. The great unseen river. It begins humbly, like all revolutions do. A few curious men in dimly lit rooms, winding coils of wire around iron rods, static crackling between fingers, sparks leaping between brass knobs. It's the kind of discovery that doesn't make much noise at first, just a faint buzz, a flicker. But behind that flicker is a promise, energy without fire, motion without steam. Benjamin Franklin flew a kite, Alessandro Volta stacked his cells, and Michael Faraday spun copper in magnetic fields, each of them chasing lightning in a bottle, and impossibly catching it. What had once terrified the world now promised to illuminate it. By the mid-1800s, the hum of telegraph lines joined the hiss of steam. Messages zipped through wires at impossible speed, faster than any horse, faster than any train. Entire wars and economies began to depend on the pulse of dots and dashes. "What hath God wrought?" Samuel Morse tapped in 1844. And no one truly had an answer. Electricity was more than a tool. It was a new kind of heartbeat. As cities grew darker with soot, they also began to glitter. Street lamps glowed softly where once only gaslights flickered. In London and Paris, crowds gathered to watch entire boulevards come alive with artificial day. It felt like a miracle. No flames, no smoke, just light itself, obedient and clean. Enter Thomas Edison, not the first, but the loudest dreamer of them all. His laboratory in Menlo Park was less a workplace and more a shrine to curiosity. Over 2,000 failed filaments later, he finally found the right one, carbonized bamboo. The light bulb, the glowing symbol of human persistence, was born not from genius alone, but from endless grinding trial. When Edison flipped that first switch, the world gasped. Night was no longer night. Factories extended their hours, shops stayed open longer, and suddenly the rhythm of life stretched beyond the sun's schedule. People marveled at the convenience. Few noticed the subtle shift beneath it. Work no longer had to stop when daylight ended. Progress, once confined to the day, could now continue indefinitely. The age of exhaustion was reborn in electric light. While Edison championed direct current, another mind worked in shadows. Nikola Tesla, the man of visions and storms. His ideas danced ahead of their time, filled with lightning towers and invisible waves. He dreamed of wireless energy, of free power coursing through the air itself. Edison's DC and Tesla's AC battled for supremacy in what the newspapers called the War of Currents. Sparks flew, sometimes literally. Edison staged electrocutions to prove Tesla's system dangerous, but in the end, alternating current won. The world would hum to Tesla's tune, even if few remembered his name. With electricity came invention at a dizzying pace. Alexander Graham Bell turned vibrations into voices. The telephone connected the distant. Guglielmo Marconi sent messages without wires. Suddenly distance, that old stubborn barrier, began to crumble. Imagine living through it. One lifetime, and the entire texture of the world changes. You could speak to someone miles away. You could stay up long after the stars came out. You could see through darkness and hear through walls. To those alive then, it must have felt like magic, made practical. By the turn of the 20th century, the glow of bulbs replaced the glow of firelight. Steamships now carried dynamos in their bellies. Factories purred with electric motors instead of pounding pistons. The symphony of progress no longer clanked and hissed. It buzzed and whirred. And beneath it all, a strange restlessness grew. Electricity didn't just change machines, it changed minds. The world was faster, brighter, more connected than ever. Ideas spread like sparks, igniting revolutions not of muscle, but of thought. The camera lens blinked open. The phonograph whispered music from a spinning disc. Moving pictures flickered onto walls, and for the first time, humanity began to record its own soul. Voices could be preserved, faces could live beyond death. The machine age had birthed memory itself. You can almost hear it, can't you? The soft hum beneath the surface, the flicker of streetlights outside Victorian windows, the faint electric pulse that replaced the rhythm of horse hooves and hammer strikes. And somewhere, in the midst of all that wonder, a quiet question began to form. What happens when invention outpaces understanding? Electricity brought with it a new hunger. If wires could carry voices, why not motion? If a filament could light a room, could it also ignite an engine? The late 19th century turned into a playground for dreamers. Carl Benz rolled out his motor wagon, a rickety contraption of wheels and courage. Gottlieb Daimler followed, turning smoke and spark into motion, and soon Henry Ford would turn that motion into an empire. Cars became the new symbol of modernity, loud, fast, and liberating. Horses snorted at the sight, unaware that their age was ending. The roads filled with machines, and humanity began its love affair with speed. Meanwhile, in laboratories and workshops, new materials, new fuels, and new possibilities crackled into being. The internal combustion engine, the dynamo, the light switch. Each invention felt like another key unlocking some deeper chamber of human potential. And yet, the more the world lit up, the more its shadows deepened. Electricity brought communication, but also control. Surveillance, industrial accidents, cities alive at midnight but too bright to see the stars. The line between day and night blurred, and with it, the line between work and rest. Still, there was no going back. The world had crossed another threshold. The steam age had taught humanity to move mountains. The electric age taught it to think in currents and circuits. And as you stand in this glowing new world, under street lamps, beside flickering billboards, within humming factories, you can almost feel history exhale. The air is alive with static, with promise, with danger. The world no longer runs on steam. It hums, it buzzes, it vibrates with invisible power. And just ahead, the next transformation waits. The world about to be woven together, not by rails or smoke, but by wires and waves. Because the hum of electricity is only the beginning of another revolution. One that will shrink the world even more. One pulse, one signal, one spark at a time. The soot settles at least on the surface. The sky, once blackened by chimneys, starts to clear. But the rhythm they created never really stops. Even now, somewhere deep in the bones of the modern world, you can still hear it, that low, steady thrum of progress. The heartbeat of the Industrial Revolution hasn't gone silent, it's just changed instruments. You stand here at the far end of it all, centuries away from the first hiss of steam, and yet you still live inside its echoes. Every light that flicks on, every engine that stirs, every notification that blinks on a screen, all of it hums in the same key. The melody of motion, the song of the machine. Factories still stand, though they look different now. The old brick giants of Manchester and Birmingham are museums, cafes, condos, but the spirit that filled them has simply migrated. It lives in server farms, in assembly lines, in skyscrapers, humming with air conditioners. The smoke may have lifted, but the pace, the relentless tempo of production, has only accelerated. It's strange to think that the Industrial Revolution didn't really end, it just evolved. It learned to run faster, to hide better. Where once men and women fed looms and furnaces, now they feed data and algorithms. The tools have changed, but the hunger, that insatiable need to produce, to improve, to expand, remains exactly the same. The first industrial workers rose with the whistle of the mill. Now you rise with the chime of an alarm. Their shifts began when the sun broke over smokestacks. Yours begins when the glow of a screen pulls you back to wakefulness. Progress, for all its brilliance, has a way of looping back on itself. If you listen closely, you can almost trace the lineage. The factory line became the office cubicle. The loom became the laptop. The overseer became the algorithm. And the whistle that once marked the end of a shift became the vibration in your pocket that never seems to stop. The revolution promised freedom. And in many ways, it delivered. People traveled farther, lived longer, learned more. The inventions born from steam and wire shaped everything that came after. But beneath it all, the cost remains. Invisible perhaps, but still owed. The fatigue of constant productivity. The quiet ache of time measured in hours, not seasons. Even now, the ghosts of that age linger. They walk in the cracks of old cobblestone streets, in the rusting wheels by forgotten canals. You can almost see them. Soot-streaked children carrying lunch tins, women with sleeves rolled to their elbows, men coughing coal dust from their lungs. Their hands built the world you live in, though their names have mostly faded into factory ledgers. History, as it turns out, doesn't vanish, it just burrows deeper. The industrial city may no longer choke on smoke, but the atmosphere of urgency remains. Deadlines, quotas, targets. The language of industry echoes through every modern job description. Even leisure has become scheduled, optimized, monetized. The same hunger that powered steam engines now drives code, algorithms, and markets that never sleep. And yet, amid all this hum, there's still something deeply human at its core. The same spark that made a young James Watt wonder if steam could move a wheel is the same spark that makes someone today dream of clean energy or artificial intelligence. The same drive to tinker, to improve, to make sense of the unknown. The soot may have settled, but curiosity hasn't. You can still smell it sometimes. That faint tang of oil and metal in a subway station, the hiss of hydraulics as a bus door opens, the whir of a fan cooling an overworked processor. All faint reminders of where it began, with pistons and pumps, with curiosity turned kinetic. And maybe that's what the Industrial Revolution really was. It wasn't just a century of machines, but the awakening of restlessness. Humanity realizing it could reshape the world and then never stopping. You stand now in the aftermath of that awakening. The earth bears its marks, mines hollowed into scars, rivers redirected, skies rewritten with vapor trails instead of smoke. We've traded chimneys for satellites, soot for signal. But it's all the same pulse. The same yearning to create, to connect, to consume. There's poetry in that, in the way progress both builds and erases. Every bridge, every circuit, every glowing city skyline, they're monuments to ambition and amnesia at once. We rarely look back long enough to see the line connecting us to those early days when steam first turned a wheel and the world gasped at the sound. But tonight, you do. You trace it in your mind. From coal dust to circuit board, from telegraph key to touchscreen, from the first drop of oil to the glow of your own electric light. The distance between then and now isn't as wide as it seems. It's just a long, unbroken hum of invention. And maybe, just maybe, this revolution isn't over. Maybe it never will be. Every time a new machine is born, every time we say, the future, what we're really saying is the next chapter of the Industrial Revolution. The same story, written with different tools. As you stand at this edge of history, surrounded by light, motion, and noise, there's a quiet thought that settles in. We built all this, and it built us back. Our bones remember rhythm now. Our minds run on loops of efficiency. Our hearts race not to survive, but to keep up. The machines have changed, but the music hasn't. And as the hum of traffic fades outside your window, you can almost hear it, faint and ancient, the whisper of steam escaping from an iron valve. The sound that started it all, that first hiss, that first spark, that first promise that the world could be different, faster, brighter, louder. The soot may have settled long ago, but the legacy still lingers in every light that burns through the night, in every hand that builds, types, or dreams. And as you drift towards sleep, surrounded by the soft, electric glow of modern life, you realize something simple. The miracle was never just the machines. It was the people who dared to build them. The tired hands, the restless minds, the dreamers who saw potential in pressure, order in chaos, and possibility in smoke. The story of the Industrial Revolution doesn't end. It just hums quietly on, in every city, every circuit, every heartbeat that still believes in progress. And somewhere, under it all, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear that first hiss of steam.